John Travis, locked up in a hotel in Sydney, uh, talking to Judyth Weaver in North Seattle. Here it is the 24th of November and the 23rd of November there.
Mhm.
And we just calculate we haven't seen each other for 44 years. When I took a Tai Chi class from you in Mill Valley, might have seen you around town a little bit after that. But I went to Costa Rica in 1980 and not sure where you went, but let's find out what led to who you are and why, and beginning with your birth and parents and what they did and siblings and influences, early childhood influences, all that stuff.
Oh boy. Okay, so I was born on April 15th, 1939, and it was not tax day then. I remember, I'm going to jump ahead. I remember sitting on the floor listening to the radio, one of those big radios, just wooden things that stood on the
Yeah.
floor. And the voice came out of it and it said that tax day was going to be extended for another month. It will no longer be March 15th. It will be April 15th. And I remember thinking, I don't know what that is, but I don't think this is so good for me. So anyway, my birthday was April 15th when it was not tax day. And it was a very difficult birth. In fact, many, many years later, working extensively with Ray Castellino, I learned that I died during my birth, and my mother almost died. And they sort of, pulled me out, threw me to the side, saved her life, and told her never to do that again. 3.5 years later, she did do that again, and she died in childbirth or after childbirth. But my sister was born and lived.
Now it sounds like if they threw you aside, what measures were taken to keep you alive?
Well, after not much. I don't handle cold very well, I can assure you that. And as I here, wrapped up. And it took me, I've been wearing shawls for many, 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 many years. And only through the working on the birth trauma and all the issues, I realized that when I put around my shawls, I'm swaddling myself. I am clothing myself. I'm redoing that every single time. I have a lot of shawls and I wear them often. So many pieces fit. But so there I am, 3.5.
Where were you born?
I was born in Detroit, Michigan.
Oh.
My mother was 30 when she died. My father was 32, and here he had I was never told that my mother died. I was just told that she went away. So you can imagine that I tried to figure out what I had done.
Oh, horrors.
Yeah. So a year after that, we moved to Rochester, New York. I remember being on the train with this little baby who I finally figured out that she belonged to my family. Had no idea who she was in the beginning.
Wow.
And we moved to Rochester, New York, and lived with one of my father's brothers for a while until the family just found, this was 1942 now, the family found the only woman that nobody in their right mind would marry. And my father married her because he had an infant and a 4-year-old. And so from that time on, I had a wicked stepmother who was very, very wicked.
Wow.
Very high strung, very, well, I can just say that I never received a hug from that woman, never.
Wow.
In 1948, we moved down to Miami, Florida, because my father came from a family that I think there were 9 boys and 1 girl, and several of them were living in Miami, Florida. So he felt it would be, things would be better there. Things were warmer there, the weather, but yeah. But with a stepmother like that, it didn't much matter. It was a very, very abusive, very, very difficult. And they also had a child. So I have a half sister as well. 3.5 years in between. And I grew up as if anyone could in Miami, Florida, in the city, not on the beach. And back up a little bit. One of the really very important things in my life was that from the time I was 6 years old, I would go to sleep holding my eyes back, hoping that they would slant by the time I woke up. And I wanted long black hair. And I wanted to grow up and marry the Dalai Lama. This was 1944, 45. Nobody knew who the Dalai Lama was.
Yeah.
This was during the war. I remember seeing a movie where they called them the dirty Japs. I mean, who in the world in their right mind?
Yeah.
That this was going out of context again, many, many years later. The first time I had, this time it was a public interview with the Dalai Lama. I've had a private interview with him too, but you know, you stand in line and people, you know, and his helpers sort of push you ahead and he shakes your hand. This was the days when people were, this was quite some time ago now. And he said to me, Tashidela, and what came out of my mouth was, it's so nice to see you again. And then I was pushed ahead and I thought, who said that? But that's what, I had no idea, but that's what came out.
Some past life connection, maybe?
Yeah, yeah, without question. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was a strange time in my, pardon?
Did the wicked stepmother treat her own daughter any better?
Yeah. I remember getting a birthday gift from my mother's sisters, and the birthday gift went immediately to her daughter. And I had to write a thank you card, of course. Yeah. Yeah, it was not a good situation.
I hope there's going to be a pumpkin and glass slipper later on if gifts come out of our wounds, but we'll get there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, glass slipper, with my luck, I would trip and cut my foot. So, but it was, so as you can imagine, I spent a lot of my young time wondering why I was here. What am I supposed to do? You know, what's this all about? And I went as I could. I studied all different kinds of religions. I went to different churches with the friends in Miami that I grew up with, and everything. And Will Durant's Story of Philosophy or History of Philosophy. I started with, Plato and Aristotle. I went through them all. I think I quit at Kant. I just couldn't go any further because all these men were telling me how it was. And it didn't feel right to me. That wasn't my answer. It may have been their answer.
You didn't find Simone de Beauvoir, however you pronounce her name?
She wasn't, not then. I was still, this was younger than
before
she
wouldn't have
came
been
out.
published,
Yeah. After all the Western philosophers, I kept on searching. And when I found both Taoism and Buddhism at the same time, really. And basically, the question, why am I here? What do I do? What I got from that was, why are you here? I don't know why you're here, but since you're here, why don't you do the best you can? And I went, boing, okay, that I can handle. Yeah, so that I can handle. And I always had this attraction to Asia anyway, from this to everything. So I graduated high school when I was 16, and I worked for a year in Miami to save up enough money and left for New York City as quickly as I could with the 3 most important books in my life. That one of them I carried around the world probably several times. One was the Tao Te Ching. The other book that influenced me greatly was Paramhansa Yoganandaji's Autobiography of a Yogi.
A yogi, yeah.
And Somerset Maugham's The Razor's Edge.
Don't know that one.
Oh my, wonderful. Um, about a man who had, escaped, went to India, spent years there, came back to New York and was working as a taxi driver in his bliss. And every time I took a taxi in New York City, I would look to see if it could have been him, those blue eyes or something. I should read it again. Larry, I think was his name. So those were my 3 books. My mother, who I knew only shortly, had been a dancer. And I made my stage debut at age 2.5 while she was still alive. I remember I was a tightrope walker in a dancing school's recital. The rope was on the floor and I had an umbrella. And I remember doing that. And my stepmother, on the other hand, basically wouldn't allow me to move. I had to sit on a little stool outside in the heat in Florida and not move for hours and hours and hours. So my relief for my escape was to move or try to move. So I still wanted to be a dancer. And I went to New York with another high school friend. We both wanted to be dancers. So we went to New York City, 1956 or 57. West Side Story had just opened up, the original West Side Story.
Mm-hmm.
And I must say that I saw West Side Story original cast 4 times, the whole play, 17 times the second act, because during intermission, if there were empty spaces, we could sneak in and watch the last half of the program. So that's, we saw many, many performances on Broadway in New York City.
Now, was this a custom? Did they encourage this or?
Not encouraged, but ignored.
Ignore, okay.
I mean, by the time of intermission, nobody was going to come.
Yeah, yeah.
So we knew the time. We were living not far away from that, and just walk in and don't cause any trouble.
So how'd your dance career evolve then?
I was quite an passionate, aspiring dancer. I went to dance classes probably every day, probably more than once a day. I was a Martha Graham type of dancer. And it was, I really got to dancing, real dancing, late in life. So I was not all that good, quite frankly, but I made costumes for other dancers, ran the tape recorders, did various things and performed a bit. It was the dance life, the dancer's life. I thought of even auditioning for Radio City Music Hall, but I was too short.
Oh.
Even that, because they do have, this gradation where you can't see it. I was too short for that.
Oh.
So lots of dancing, a bit of teaching. And interestingly enough, and I still had this attraction to Asia. So this is the 50s. China is closed. I really wanted to get to Tibet, but it was so far away, I wasn't quite sure how to do that. India was, far too. And having studied some Japanese classical dance and some Japanese and some calligraphy and all those things that were Asian that were available at that time. Well, I'm skipping a bit. 1960, I went to the West Coast on my way to Asia, but I knew I didn't have that much money. So all the way to San Francisco, and then I'll live there and work for a while and then go on. What happened in 1961 was that I was in an automobile accident that sent me flying through the air for about 30 feet. And I remember going, sky, tree, earth, and landing on my head on Highway 101, right near Gilroy, California. And probably if I hadn't been a Graham dancer, because her signature movement is this contraction and the movements of the spine. So my back muscles were very, very strong. And I compression fractured 3 vertebrae, but I was still alive, which was pretty amazing. And so recuperating and various things like that in San Francisco also brought me back to New York after a bit. And I think I went back and forth several times. I said that San Francisco was more beautiful and it was actually friendlier, but the top dancing was in New York. So I think I did year changes back and forth. Performing a bit.
Or,
Pardon?
in those days, we didn't have jets and
Right. Yeah.
barely. Did you drive, fly, or?
We drove. Those days there probably still are now, people wanted their cars to be driven
Oh,
across.
yes,
Oh,
yes.
so many times. Ugh. Yeah, a lot of that. Yes. And there was the dance group that I was working with in San Francisco was asked by what was the Actors Workshop in San Francisco, who had always done plays, and it was a good acting repertoire. They wanted to do a musical, and Aristophanes' The Birds was a play that had been put to music by, I forget his name, a jazz musician, and they needed some dancers. And so we were cast as dancers, and it ran for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, something like that. And then they were commissioned to go to New York and become the repertoire. Lincoln Center had just opened up, so they were going to be the theater company, the acting company there. Back and forth and back and forth. And all I remember is I left for Asia from New York. I never did things really easily, and timing was never my best. It still isn't. And I said that actually I had met someone and we had talked about getting married, and I thought, oh, well, there's something I've always wanted to do. I just need to go to Asia and then I'll be back, and then I'll marry and settle down. What I started to say that in that last year before I left, this was 1964 now, I started studying Nihon Buyo, which is the Japanese classical dance, which comes out of the kabuki drama that is so classical in Japan. And interesting, I spoke to the teacher on the phone, and I told her I didn't have any kimonos or anything. She said, okay, I'll loan you one. I went there the first day and she helped me dress, and we started in Japan, how you learn, you just copy. So
now you're in Japan now.
No, I'm still in New York.
Oh, okay.
57th Street, the Japan Society building. There were classes, weekly classes. So I'm following her and she's looking at me very strangely. And she said, are you sure you haven't done this before? And I said, no. That very day, I was looking at something at a table, and a Japanese man came into the room from the back, and he thought I was Japanese, but by the way I wore the kimono and how I felt. And I had also been up to the Boston Museum with my roommate, who was also a dancer. And I saw a scroll in the museum, and it was so beautiful that I got a photograph of it, and I started choreographing this Japanese scroll into a modern dance. And when I told my teacher about it and what the story was, she looked at me even more strangely, and she said, you know, that's a very famous true story in Japan.
Ah.
So when I finally did go to Japan, it was like home. And it
Mm.
really was. I realized I had never been comfortable in the United States. I knew I was born into the wrong family. And I also felt that I had been born into the wrong country.
Yeah.
And so I started studying Nihon Buyo. In Japan, you really can't do anything unless you have a letter of introduction.
Mm-hmm.
And unbeknownst to me, this one teacher in the United States who was teaching in New York, she said, you know, you're going to Japan, good, I'll give you a letter to my teacher. And I didn't know that her teacher was, you would consider him the emperor of all Japanese classical dance.
Wow.
And his wife was a very famous movie star. He was really the emperor. And in his classes were all of these top geisha sons, you know, geisha dancers and performers and kabuki stars. And this is who I studied dance with for, well, I went every day. They only went once a week. No, for 1 week a month. And it was pretty incredible. I loved the dancing and I was very, very good at it. And then shortly after, I settled in Tokyo, Kamakura first and then Tokyo. I saw my first performance of No, which is another very, very classical, even more classical, older than Kabuki. And I looked at it and I thought, oh no, I'm studying the wrong art. Because I just fell in love with No, Noh. It was, I think, the closest thing that I can describe. It's something like traditional Greek drama. You know, the movements are slow, they're classical, they're spacious. It's just amazing. And I couldn't quit my kabuki classes because this family, this imperial family of dance had taken me in and they were giving me kimonos to wear and taking me to kabuki sans. So I just added to my repertoire the no classes as well. And it was very, very interesting. I performed a no dance in Japan. I didn't perform kabuki in Japan because it would cost a fortune just to get the wigs and everything that was needed. But after a year, I felt, there's something missing. One of the things I really, really, really wanted to study in Japan that I hadn't, it was the art, the movement. I studied tea ceremony. I studied everything that moved. And the one thing I hadn't studied was the spiritual aspect. I had read all of D.T. Suzuki's books. And one of the reasons that I went to Japan at that time was because Alan Watts was driving me nuts. His depictions, you might say, I mean, he popularized Zen, but when he came out with his beat Zen and square Zen, I thought, okay, enough of that. I really want to go to the source. Mm-hmm. So that sent me to Japan. And in Tokyo, in addition to the kabuki classes and the no classes, I began sitting with this amazing, amazing Zen master who was also the world's top kendo master. He and his top student were the only ones in the whole world who had permission to fight a duel to the death if they ever felt like it, which they never did. But he was an extraordinary, beautiful, beautiful person. And when I told him that I wanted to go to a monastery and really experience it, and I was going to go to this monastery because I heard that the abbot there spoke a bit of English, he said to me, he said, "Oh, you go to my friend. He speaks a little bit of English too. I'll give you a letter." And I went, "A letter? Got it." I knew that's what I needed. So
Kendo is a martial art?
yeah, it's a sword fighting.
Oh, okay.
He was consultant for all of Kurosawa's films.
Oh.
Maybe he even did some of the fighting in there. I never asked.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that, yeah, the sword fighting, the samurai fighting. Yeah.
So what got you interested in sword fighting?
Oh, it wasn't. I just heard that he was
Oh.
a good Zen teacher.
Oh, okay. So
And
it's
he just
more
also
taken by
happened to
force.
be, he had a duel. He had two things
Uh-huh.
going, as I do also, but it wasn't, I enjoyed watching him, but I was never interested. Although it is one of the Zen practices, kendo, and also archery with those big, huge kyushu, huge, humongous bows.
Mm.
So I went with my letter down to Kobe, Japan. I really wanted to go someplace else, but here it was, the letter, which was, I knew by now that if you had a letter, without a letter in Japan, you can't breathe. So here I had my letter, and I go up to the monastery and present my letter. And I mean, now I wasn't aware of it. Now I'm sure that the head monk went, "Oh my God, what am I going to do?" The abbot, the great master, the Roshi, was away. And if I had not had the letter, he just would have, pushed me out the door very, very, maybe not so kindly, and been done with me. But I had this letter. So he couldn't throw me out. And I was able to stay there for a week until the master came back. And the funny thing is, everything is very hierarchical in Japan. I was speaking Japanese like a geisha would speak, like a very, very high class woman would speak. And even when I asked the first time where the bathroom was, he couldn't even understand my words, because monks have a very lower level of language. So it was a very interesting week.
The
And
different vocabulary, not just the pronunciation?
no, not just the pronunciation, vocabulary too. Yeah.
Really? Oh, I didn't
Like,
know that.
like to ask where the bathroom is, a monk or a man would say, "Benjo wa doku desu ka?" Benjo, toilet, where is it? Where the woman would say, "Oterai wa doko kashira desho ka?" And what she said was, "Oh, where can I go and wash my hands?" Basically, literally. And where do you think it might be? That difference. A week later, when the Roshi came back and spoke to me, and he asked me what I had done in the United States. And I said, well, I had been a dancer, but I was here because I wanted to learn Zen. I wanted to really understand it. I'd read so much. That was not it. And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, a dancer. Now you will learn here, you will learn the highest form of dance, movementless dance. And I thought, okay. And that started a year and a half of amazing experience. This was one of the top training monasteries for men. It was, and Rinzai Zen is sort of like the Marine Corps of Zen also. It was not a leisurely, easy place. After a week there and having met him, I knew that this was what I wanted to do. And I was so impassioned that I forgot to ask permission. I went back to Tokyo. I canceled all of my classes. By this time I was teaching dance classes and other things and had been doing some translating and things. And I had forgotten that I was a Caucasian. I had forgotten that I wasn't a male. I had forgotten everything. And I was just impassioned. And I came back and I said, here I am. And he said, huh? And he really, really was enlightened enough to allow me to stay. So I was the only woman in a monastery with 30 men.
And the only Caucasian.
And the only Caucasian, yes. Well, actually, for a while, there was another male Caucasian from the US, or from Mexico, really. And there had been 2 other women in the past. One was quite some time ago, but one was not too much before me. And she caused a lot of trouble because she wore her diamond brooches and perfume and all sorts of things. You know, I did everything but shaved my head. I got into my monk's kimono and I put my hair up so they wouldn't see it. It was very long, and my eyes down, and I just did what I needed to do. And I didn't need to talk because it's just, you ring a bell and it all happens. So you just have to pay attention. And it was interesting. Some of the older monks who, they weren't too happy about it. The younger monks who had just come, they weren't too happy about it either. But the monks that were really in their training, they could care less. They were doing their practice and I was doing my practice. But everything is by order. So there's a huge zendo, this rectangular room where you sit for meditation, and it's, of course, by order. So there was the head monk, and then the next monk, and then the next monk in order on 2 sides. And then there was this whole space of nothing, emptiness. And then there was me, the woman.
Put you in your place.
They put me in my place. I could care less. I mean, my knees were going to hurt anywhere. My back was going to hurt anywhere. And it's so funny because I was the lowest place. And when the doors were open any time of the year, when it snowed, I was the only one that got snowed on. When it rained, I was the only one that got rained on. And when the bell rang to go and run to have your interview with the abbot, with the Zen master, it went out from that door. So I was the last one. So everybody ran and I ran as fast as I could. And sometimes I made it, sometimes I didn't. But from the lower end where I was sitting, there's a little room where the head monks sort of live. And when it's time for sitting, they bring the incense, they slide open the doors down there, and they walk the whole range of the room and then put the incense by the Buddha and sit. And their protocol had an added movement. They would open the doors and their heads would go to see if I was there. They were expecting me not to be there. Other American men had been and gone. Maybe some of them lasted a couple days or a week. And the women did their things. But I just really wanted to show them that women can do it, that American women can do it. So every single day, slide open the door and there I was, no matter what. I never missed a second. It was really something. And then finally, let's see, I guess it was the first year. So I was there for almost 2 years. And on December 21st, we have solstice here in this country, in the West. They do also, and that one day, December 21st, the rule is really, it's to change all of the yin of all of that meditating for the year into yang for the strength that you need to get through the rest of the year and go into the rest of the winter. And the rule of the day is to go against all the rules. So it's an amazing experience. The first time I was there, I mean, I helped them cook in the kitchen, but I saw cases and cases of sake. You know, they never drank. Well, in the monastery, they never drank, but amazing amounts of liquor, all sorts of things. And at the end of the banquet, there was a talent show, actually, parodying, just making jest of anything they wanted. It's really creativity that could not have happened, because Japan doesn't, creativity is not the thing, especially not in a Zen monastery. It's following the rules. And at that time, one of the guests who was from a nearby temple came up to me and he said, "What are you doing here? You can't be here. You're a woman, you're a Westerner, you don't belong here." And the head monk came up to him and he put his hand on his shoulder and he said, "You know what? She's all right. She's been sitting with us, and you know what? We even let her use our toilet." And I knew that I had been accepted finally. So that was an amazing, amazing time. What I didn't, what?
How long were you there?
I was there for a year and a half.
Oh.
And then it was, by that time, my Zen master named Yamada Mumon, what I didn't know about him is that he is considered the greatest Zen master of the 20th century. You know, to me, he was just a terrifying Buddha that I had to go and answer my koan with. He wanted me to shave my head and become a nun and stay there forever. But I knew that that wasn't my path, at least not right then. I knew that since my mother had died at age 30, there were certain things I needed to do in the world before I reached the age of 30, because somewhere in me, I had this connection and I didn't think I was going to live past 30. Mm. So here I am, 28, 29. And I knew that I had had such a miserable childhood. I thought of becoming a child psychologist, but certainly having children and doing better. So I knew I wasn't going to shave my head and become a nun. And at this time, after about a year and a half, my Zen master was leading a pilgrimage through Southeast Asia, a Buddhist pilgrimage. So I asked him if I could go along, thinking I would go and then continue. And he accepted me. And so after a year and a half, I departed and had an amazing trip with him and his, connections of, he was a very famous Zen master, and he has written a lot. He's famous for his calligraphy. That's one of his calligraphies behind me on the wall, that Enzo. And what that says is nothing missing, nothing added. Mm. He's written many books. He was renowned for his teachings. And he was instrumental in, I guess it was mainland China and Japan, talking to each other after many, 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 many years. So that when we went by boat first, stopped in, it must have been Hong Kong. Did we go to Taiwan? No, it must have been Hong Kong. They wouldn't let him off the boat because they were so angry about that. But finally, to go to Cambodia in 1968, before their horrible times, and Thailand and India, and where else? And Nepal, and
This was all the pilgrimage, or had you split off then?
No, it was the Buddhist pilgrimage.
Mhm.
In India, they left and went back to Japan, and I continued on.
How did this pilgrimage travel? By car or?
Um, by bus, by car, by plane,
Mhm.
like from one country to the other. I remember being in an airport, probably in Cambodia, Siem Reap, and hearing, this was 68. Yeah, 1968, hearing gunshots
Mhm.
and seeing a lot of people in uniform. I had been in a monastery for a year and a half. I didn't know really what was happening.
Mm.
It's very interesting. And again, I wanted to go to Tibet, made it to Nepal, but wasn't quite sure. And then I was going to take a bus from India overland through Afghanistan. I wanted to spend some time with the whirling dervishes, anything of movement.
Mhm.
And I didn't, because I was asked to come quickly to Mexico and start a Buddhist center there with one of the monks who had been in the monastery and one of the Mexican American men who had been there. So, so I did go around and spent about 6 months, 3 months, 6 months in Mexico before coming back to the United States.
Mm.
Yeah. Mhm.
And so you set up a monastery in Mexico. Whereabouts?
A Zen center, not a monastery.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it started in Mexico City.
Mhm.
And is still has uh, descendants or students from that there. The more modern psychiatrists or psychological community of Mexico. By this time, there had already been that conference in Cuernavaca done by D.T. Suzuki and Richard Martino and who else? And Eric Fromm. It was called Zen Buddhism and Psychoanalysis.
Mm.
And so people knew about Zen Buddhism, and those psychiatrists really liked sending their clients for us to babysit them, basically, teach them Zazen.
Now, what about the would-be suitor you left behind when you went to Japan? Was he?
By the time I did the whole thing around, well, when I got to Japan and knew that I wasn't coming back in the few months, when I got to the monastery, I had certainly written him and told him that that whole thing was off. I bought a round the trip ticket for, I think it was $1,200.
Yeah, that's.
Pan Am, yeah.
Yeah.
So I had turned that in because I needed the money. And by the time I got back to pick up my stuff at his parents' house, he was already married and had a child. So everything worked out fine. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So you're back in the States now. This would be what, 69, 70 or?
Well, 68.
Mhm.
Interestingly, in New York, so in New York, as a dancing student, I also, of course, had to work and support myself. So I was a legal secretary, well, a secretary, and then became a legal secretary, and also did modeling for various artists, Moses Sawyer being the main person I modeled for. But in the 56, 57, I had taken courses at the New School for Social Research and Taoism and various things. And in the program that I was looking at, there was a course that was entitled Nonverbal Communication. And I thought, okay, that's for me. That's definitely for me. And it was given by Charlotte Selver and Charles Brooks.
I was wondering when that connection would happen. Yeah.
Well, it didn't happen. I had no idea who they were. I liked the title
Oh.
very much, but it conflicted with some of my dance classes, so I never
Oh.
made it. Those
Had they
three.
published their book yet? I had their book in the
No.
70s. Yeah.
Yeah, not yet. That was the 70, 73, 74,
Yeah. I
72.
remember that. That was a real eye opener for me.
Yeah, and many, many people. So Interestingly enough, coming back up from Mexico, San Francisco, where I had lived before, and while I was in Japan, people would send me pictures. There was this Zen center that had started, and they were raising money to buy this property in the mountains in Carmel Valley that turned out to be Tassajara.
Oh,
So I knew about this, and
mhm.
where I went to live when I got back to the States was Zen Center in San Francisco. And one night, not very long after I arrived, somebody said, hey, Charlotte Selver and Charles Brooks are leading a workshop at the Unitarian Church. Anybody want to go? And so I went, and that's when I met them.
Oh, the one down there where Geary splits and
Geary and Franklin, yes,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
That gorgeous window, yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that started, that was 1968. Yeah. And I remember writing back or trying to tell my Zen master that I had found, you might say, living Zen. I didn't have to be in a monastery anymore and have to struggle so much with koans and aching bodies and everything, that this was sort of like everyday Zen. And he wrote me back and he said, yes, that sounds good. And you still have to sit. You still have to do the sitting meditation. So, which was true. It's very, very, it's different. It's the same. And they're both really wonderful parts of the same puzzle, you might say.
So you went to the workshop with them, and then that led to your
More and more and more workshops. But interestingly enough, in Japan, one of the people that I met was Ruth Suzaki, who had created the first Zen Institute of America in Japan. She was a wealthy woman from New York who had gone to Japan an earlier time than me. She was older than I was. And she she lived in a hotel, but sat in a different monastery. And somehow maybe he came to New York and she married him a Japanese Zen teacher, and they did some books together. She has quite a few books out. And eventually he died. And so she would go back and forth from New York to Kyoto, where her institute was. And I was sitting with her one day and we were talking about things. And she said to me, well, my dear, what is it that you did in the United States, in New York? And I said, well, I was a dancer, and to support my dancing habit, I was a legal secretary, but I don't have to do that anymore. And she said, why not? And it was like what came out of her mouth was like a light bulb that just went into me. And it said, well, it's not that because I've had this wonderful experience or am having this wonderful experience of Zen, that doesn't mean that I never have to be a secretary again. What it does mean is that if I ever have to be a secretary again, I can be a better secretary, just because I would do it more fully. I was never a really good secretary anyway. So one day in Zen Center, sitting in my room, somebody opened the door and stuck his head in and said, do you know how to type? And I hate typing. I'm really bad at typing. And I said, yes. And he said, would you like a job typing? And I said, okay. And that's because one day I was sitting with my Zen master, who was so busy. He was president of the Rinzai Buddhist University in Kyoto. He had this huge monastery in Kobe. He had other temples all around, and he was always traveling and giving talks. And every winter, he took a bunch of, he went to the South Sea Islands and walked along the beach and picked up bones that had just been laying there since the war and gave them last rites. And he always brought some orphans, some kids whose father had been killed in the war, to do, their final respects to their father. And one day I was sitting with him, and his attendant stuck the head in the door and said, "Sir, there is this ladies' Rotary Club would like you to come and give a talk on such and such a date." And I almost said, "Roshi-sama, you don't have to do that. They're just, they don't listen to you. They're just there for the tea." And he just put his hand in his sleeve, took out his little appointment book, opened it up and said, "Yes, I'm free that day." Closed it and put it back. No judgment.
Mm.
He's being asked if he can do it, he'll do it. So there I was with a Zen Center. "Can you type? Do you want this job?" And I said, "Okay, no judgment." And it turned out to be that Esalen Institute had just opened up an office in San Francisco, come up from Big Sur, and they wanted to put out their first newsletter and needed someone to type it.
Mm.
So I typed the first newsletter. Their office was on Union Street, actually. And Michael Murphy, one of the founders of Esalen, liked me that week. So I was asked to stay on. And I eventually was Michael Murphy's secretary for a chunk of time. And by that time, Charlotte and Charles were giving workshops at Esalen in Big Sur, which I was able to go to because I was working. And I met the person who was the director of Esalen at that time, whose name was Ben Weaver. And when he came up to the office the first time with his wife, I remember going, "They don't seem to really go together," but I didn't say anything, of course. A couple months later, he came up by himself and we talked a bit. They had separated, they were getting a divorce, and eventually we got together, and that's how I got the name Weaver.
Uh-huh. What name were you born with? I forgot to ask that.
Afsowitz.
Sounds German?
Russian.
Oh, Russian. Uh-huh.
Afsowitz would be the pronunciation there. Yeah.
But did you wind up living at Esalen then? And when you
I did. I did. I lived at Esalen. I taught at Esalen. I taught Tai Chi and other things. I did not have permission from Charlotte yet to do the sensory awareness, so I didn't, but it certainly helped my doing all of her classes possible. I followed her down to Mexico a bunch of times, to Mohegan Island in the summers, in Maine, and then New York in the autumn, Mexico in the winter, and California in the spring. They had a really good itinerary.
Yeah. Where were they based in those days?
They were based in New York in the autumn. They had a house in Tepoztlan, near Cuernavaca. And then Charles had built a house on the top, above Muir Beach, at the top of the mountain there in California. And then the apartment in New York.
Mm.
So they kept on doing that for many, 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 many years.
Yeah. You mentioned Michael Murphy. I lived across the street from Michael and Dulcie on Hillside Avenue. Did you ever get over to their house?
I was in their house before they moved to Mill Valley.
Oh, okay.
That was on Mill Valley, right?
Yeah, up the long stairway.
Yeah, they had, it was, I forget where, but there was a park and it was a curved street, the San Francisco house.
Mm-hmm.
I was there often doing work with him.
Now, where'd you learn the Tai Chi? In Esalen, or was that?
When I was in New York, well, before I ever saw it, I knew I wanted to learn Tai Chi. Again, it was that attraction. When I was in New York as a dancer, I would go to various classes, one of them being Sophia Delzo, who was the first person who brought Tai Chi to the West.
Mm.
And I would take a class and it just didn't feel right. was something that was, it didn't feel right to me, so I didn't continue. In Japanese dancing class in New York, I met Maggie Newman, whose name you might not know. She was one of the top modern dancers in the world. I remember seeing her on the cover of Dance Magazine. Whew. An amazing, amazing woman. She is now 95 years old. So she's even a bit older than me. And so she had been a modern dancer. She said that she was touring with Paul Taylor in Europe. And in the middle of the tour, she just thought, this is so egocentric. I quit. So she left, she went back home to New York and started meditating. And she started studying Tai Chi with Professor Cheng Man-ching, who is considered the greatest, the last of the great Tai Chi masters. He was really extraordinary. So she was a student of his. We were both modern dancers. We were both doing Japanese kabuki dance. She was doing Tai Chi. I wanted to, and she wasn't going to introduce me to him too much. Excuse me. So when I came back from Japan and back into the Japanese kabuki dance class, I had injured my knees dancing as a teenager, injured them more dancing as an adult, injured them much more dancing in Japan, and then sitting in zazen in the monastery, probably didn't have much left of knees. And she looked at me and she said, well, I guess it's time for you to meet Professor Chung. So she brought me to him. He was a renowned Chinese doctor. And I went to him first for medicine and sat through a lot of classes. And then eventually I didn't want to stay in New York again. I wasn't, the dance world was not attracting me. And at age 29, it was definitely not going to be welcoming me. And so I wanted to go back to California, which I did. And Professor Cheng told me one student of his to go find him and have him teach me. And so I found this person, set up many, 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 many classes for him, eventually brought him to Esalen to teach my then husband. By that time I was married to Ben, and many, many other people. And this person became attracted to Erika, which was popular at that time.
Oh yeah, that was good.
And went to New York, and I ended up teaching classes for him while he was in New York. I was teaching, but I really got my permission to teach, not from him, but from Professor Cheng's studio in New York. So that was what, 1971, I think.
So Tai Chi is Chinese?
It is Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
Although people in Japan do it now. I've taught it quite a lot in Japan as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, now you're married to Ben, living at Esalen. That's not a bad life.
Not a bad life. One child born actually 50 years ago next month, my daughter. And interestingly enough, what was I going to say? At one point, Ben's brother, Richard Weaver, came down. Actually, he came down because he was having a lot of trouble with his back and he wanted some sessions with Ida Rolf. And my version of what happened was that Richard Weaver looked around, saw Esalen, and thought the Weavers were from Spokane, Washington. And Richard was living in Canada. I was a high school teacher, I think, at that time. He looked at Esalen and said, hey, I can do this in Canada. So he went back to Canada, having been pretty much healed by Ida Rolf, and bought land on Cortez Island and started Cold Mountain Institute.
Oh, that's the connection. Uh-huh.
Cold Mountain Institute from Gary Snyder's poetry translations. And that is how we went up after we left Esalen, and we went up to Cold Mountain Institute, where Richard wanted me to teach. And I just loved it up there. The remoteness, the space, the nature. I loved it. And my husband hated it.
Mm.
So after a very difficult winter, as you can imagine, and time with Charlotte and Charles and Monhegan again, we went back to Big Sur. And things just were not working so well. I was pregnant again, and Ben ran off with another woman while I was in New York working with Professor Chung. And very quickly, by 1972, I was a single mother with 2 children, and knew that living in Big Sur was not going to be easy. Making a living in Big Sur was not going to be easy. In fact, at different times, Esalen had different rules. One of them was no children for a while. That was going to make it very difficult. So
Yeah.
I was up to, I never wanted to go back to the city. I never wanted to go back to San Francisco with children. I wanted to make sure they could be out in the country. And so I found San Geronimo Valley,
Mm-hmm.
and raised my children there until a bit after the big flood of 1982, I guess.
Yeah, I was
Where were you?
I was in Costa Rica in 82, so I missed that. It flooded San Geronimo Valley.
It flooded San Anselmo. It flooded. It closed the Golden Gate Bridge for some days. It was a big, big flood. I remember going out to get some of my wood in because we didn't have any heat. We just had a wood stove, and the other pieces of wood were just whooshing down the creek. My vegetable garden, the squashes were wobbling down. A couple of people were killed. The path from Point Reyes inland was closed for months. It was a lot of damage. It was really something. And I think it must have been 82.
Yeah, I missed all that.
Lucky you.
Yeah. So when I met you in 76, you were living in San Geronimo and commuting to Mill Valley to teach there. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't realize you were a young mother then either.
Yes. And what year was it? There was one year, I was already teaching Tai Chi. I was studying at the Gestalt Therapy Institute in San Francisco, and somebody spoke about me to Ralph Metzner, and I was called in for an interview and hired to teach at the California Institute for Asian Studies. Do you remember that?
Yeah, the name anyway.
That was before, started by Haridas Chaudhry and Frederick Spiegelberg. And when they got accreditation, the accreditor said, why do you call it Asian Studies? You know, you're starting to do more. Why don't you change the name? So the name was changed to the California Institute of Integral Studies.
Oh, okay. I thought that was CIAS. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It was CIAS for a while. And strangely enough, one big thing that I've forgotten to mention is that having been left by my husband and raising 2 children, you can imagine that I felt I needed help. So I went to the Family Therapy Institute in San Rafael. And the person who picked my name out of the hat, said to me, well, you know, I've been studying this new kind of therapy, and I'd like to try it on you. It has to do with the body. And I remember sitting there thinking, body? This can't be all bad. Okay, no problem. So I was introduced to Reiki and therapy
Mm.
by a man who was studying it. And I had been to various therapy clinics in San Francisco, in New York, tried all sorts of things. Nothing really was working, except working with the body, working with the integration of the whole being. I have to admit that I actually felt some changes, and I thought, hey, this is pretty good stuff. I would like to learn more about it. So without any intention, I started studying Reiki and therapy. I had known a little bit about Reich, but not much. So the course was, it was an amazing course with amazing people. Peter Levine studied Reiki and therapy with this one person who lived in LA and came up half the week to San Francisco and the other half down there and saw clients and taught classes. Hamid Ali, who started, what is it called? Wow, for this moment, I can't think, another spiritual practice of his own. Various people with big names. And I never felt that the course was enough. So I took it again. And when I spoke to the program, there was, do you remember International College at that time?
The name is ringing some bells, but
yeah, it was interesting. It was an educational procedure, you might say, that was like the old times, the students sitting at the foot of the masters. So some of the teachers, Pablo Casal. I'm beginning to hear an echo. Are you?
yeah, it got weird there. I don't hear an echo, but it garbled your voice. So it's hopefully
Okay.
it'll clear up.
Hope so. So George Leonard was a tutor, Lawrence Durrell, Pablo Casal, Anna Halpern, maybe all of these people, and you went to study with them. And this was the program. And I took it 2 times. And when I spoke to the people, I realized that people were getting their degrees and I didn't have any degree. And I said, so here's my life. What can, what can I do? And they said, well, it looks like you really have earned a degree in dance. So we'll give you that, credit for that degree, and go ahead if you want to and see what you want to do with it. So I eventually, after studying cranial sacral therapy and the Reichian therapy and other things, I wrote my dissertation called Ways of Balance East and West. And it was Taiji Chuan and Reichian therapy, both working with energies, very differently working with energies. The Western focus on energy is very different, and at times not so different. So I had a PhD from an unaccredited institution, but that's what got me hired by CIAS, because I probably would not have been hired if I didn't have a PhD. So I was hired to teach Tai Chi, which was unusual.
International College, was it in San Francisco? Was it
It was in
brick and
Southern
mortar?
California.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And now who was teaching you were taking was it Gestalt Institute, did you say? Or what
That
was
was in San Francisco. That was started by Cindy Sheldon, whom you may know, and some others. Fritz asked her to do it. The person who taught Reiki and therapy was called Philip Cucuruto. I knew by the end of my studies that Reich never wanted it to be called Reiki and therapy. He never wanted it to be named after him. He called it vegetotherapy or
Right.
orgonomic therapy. So
Mhm.
in 1985, there was a group of, there had been a commune in Big Sur long before I got there, that were people who were very involved with Reich and Reich things, issues. And there was a house in Berkeley that once a month there was a meeting, and all of these old Reichians came together. And sometimes it would be a potluck, and sometimes we would have a speaker. Marcel Vogel was a speaker once. I don't remember who else, but one day it was Eva Reich, who was the eldest daughter of Wilhelm Reich. And
Mm.
she spoke, and she was on her way to her round the world tour for the 8th time, where she just stopped and taught many, many different places. And she was on her way to Japan. And she needed a ride to the airport. So I said, sure, I'll give you a ride to the airport. So we're sitting in my ancient 544 Volvo, 1965, like the Volkswagen with the nose, like old Fords. And we got stuck in traffic. So we had lots of time to talk. And so at one point she says, so my dear, that's enough about me. So what do you do? And I thought, oh boy, now I'm really in trouble, because I knew Reich never really wanted it. And she was definitely carrying on his work. And I said, well, here in California, on the West, we do call it Reichian therapy. So I'm certified in that. But in me, it has changed a bit because of the work of Charlotte Elsa Gindler, I mentioned, the woman that Charlotte studied with. And I sort of said that, and then I braced myself for either a hit on the head or something. And Eva said, oh, my father would be so very glad. And it turns out that we've done a lot of research on it, so it's pretty clear that Wilhelm Reich's second wife, Elsa Lindenberg, was a student of Elsa Gindler. She was also a dancer. And she was the one that influenced Wilhelm Reich to include movement, energy, breathing, body, muscles into his work. So Reichian therapy would never have been Reichian therapy without Elsa Lindenberg. And yeah, so Eva was thrilled. In fact, at one point, Elsa Lindenberg, they escaped to Norway and lived in Norway for a while. And then Reich got the last boat out coming to the United States in 1939. And Elsa Lindenberg stayed in Norway, and she taught until the end of her life. And one time, I wasn't there, but she came to Monhegan Island to work with Charlotte. And Eva Reich came to Monhegan Island to visit her her friend. Eva and I became great friends. She was a great mentor for me. She lived with me for a while in Mill Valley. I visited her multiple times in Maine. We've worked together. We talked a lot. She wanted me to be her biographer, but I don't think I'm up to that. And I have a lot of stuff, but I just don't think that that's going to happen. And I'm still friends with her daughter. And have been to Organon, where Reich lived and worked at the end.
Now, Organon, that's a place?
That's a place in Maine, Rangeley, Maine.
Named for argon energy?
Yeah.
Is it like a facility or a?
It's a facility. It's a laboratory. It's it has a telescope on the top. They've got a new website and very, very interesting. They do seminars, and I've been there for seminars. This one just recently was virtual. But you can see his library is there. And in fact, as Eva was nearing the end of her life, she gave me some of the books that her daughter did not want, and some of them are autographed by Reich to
Hmm.
Elsa and her husband, who were the parents of Renate, who is a midwife and still working in Maine.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Now, somewhere along the way, you met Pat Meyer through,
Pat, sensory awareness.
yeah, what, at Monhegan, or how did that come about?
You know, I don't remember how I first met Pat. It feels to me, so I've been studying with Charlotte and Charles since 1968. I don't remember. Oh, I remember Pat and Ray, her previous husband, and Michael, baby Michael, on
Hmm.
Monhegan one summer. And Michael's in his 20s, maybe 30s now.
Oh, he's in his 30s now. Yeah, I know him pretty
Yeah.
well from
So I've known
staying with
Pat that long.
him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you mentioned Ray Castellino earlier too, and he's also one of my interviewees. How did you connect with him?
Okay, great. Good. I'm glad you're not letting me forget anything. Although after we hang up, I'm going to go, oh no, why didn't I? But anyway, I always do that. I'm not a good speaker. I always remember afterwards. But so I had two children, thinking that I was the Earth Mother, and I would just, stay in Big Sur, just stop by the side of the road, give birth to the baby, and continue hoeing like the Chinese peasants do. Turned out that that wasn't really the case. I had an emergency C-section, possibly because the doctor was out playing golf and didn't want to come in, but we won't go there. And the second, that was my first birth child. And then the second one was after my husband had left and I moved up to the Bay Area because I felt, but not in San Francisco. As I said, I wanted to be out in the country. And this time we were living in Woodacre before I found the house in San Geronimo. And had another very difficult birth this time because I was alone and there was nobody there. But at some point, and I think it was actually talking to someone in the baths at Esalen, and they mentioned William Emerson,
Uh-huh.
who was still, I didn't know whether I wanted him to see my children, to work on their birth traumas or what, but I contacted him and he was giving workshops. So I started working with William for quite some time, and then heard about Ray and went down to work with Ray. And of the two of them, they're both beautiful people and have done some wonderful, wonderful work. But Ray's work with the spiritual content satisfied me more. So
Hmm.
I did the entire training with Ray. And then I was an assistant in one of his trainings. And now I'm certified to do his womb surround. And have done quite a few in Japan as well as here, and other kinds of workshops and lectures and things. But it wasn't until, so the Reichian therapy taught me a lot about myself and started healing. But it wasn't until I was able to face my own experiences, birth, pre-birth, post-birth, that I really got a handle on what was happening and why I was responding. So that work is crucial, was crucial for me, and I think is very, very valuable for many people. So that's an important part of the work that I do. When people ask me, well, you do so many things, what kind of people do you work with? I say, I work with big babies and little babies. You
I
know,
got to plug my battery in. I just got a message here. I thought it was on before, so get charging again.
so we're all babies. We're still babies.
Yep.
We've still got it in us. And the more we can understand, the more we can understand. I was going to say the
Exactly.
easier it will be. Not necessarily. It's just the more we'll understand.
Curious whether your second birth was a VBAC or do you have another C-section?
I tried for a VBAC, but one of the problems was that I was totally alone and forgotten about, because by this time I would, every time I got up to go pee, I would just do Tai Chi and it would stop the pain. And I have a very high threshold of pain. So people forgot about me. I went out to call my daughter and I'm talking on the telephone in the corridor of the hospital, and a doctor goes by and he just, you know, probably casually just put his fingers on my stomach and I saw his eyes bulge. And before I knew it, I was thrown onto a gurney and there were bells and whistles and I was rushed into the operating room. And I saw him afterwards and I said, how far along was I? He said, I don't even want to think about it. So basically I was probably close to having my uterus rupture. So.
Well, now putting things together here. I know that you have multiple residences, even more than I do, but you like to head to the Southern Hemisphere in the northern winters. Let's fill in the rest of your geographic. Cold Mountain, you still go back there? And
Cold Mountain became Hollyhock.
Right.
So, and it is still there, very much changing because of the world changing. And I taught Tai Chi up there numerous times, workshops. I've done residential programs, you know, somatic community with people for 3 months at a time. I eventually bought my own little postage stamp piece of property there and have my own studio so I can do the somatic process workshops is what I call them, Ray Castellino's womb surrounds. And what a wonderful place to do it because, you know, the Salish Sea is right there, the deer are walking by, the raccoons are doing their things, it's wonderful. So I'm up there as much as I can be, and right now I can't be because of the border closure. I've canceled 3 workshops on Cortez and 4 workshops in Europe this autumn. Most of them sensory awareness, but also a Tai Chi workshop in Cortez, which I do every summer. And then one, because I had so many, something I forgot, being a Buddhist, I've also worked with so many of the teachers who have come by. And in 1974, when Chungyang Trungpa was creating Naropa Institute, he said, get her. I want her energy here. At least that's what he told me afterwards. So I got a letter, we're going to do this school. Would you like to come to Boulder, Colorado for this summer? And it was addressed to both of us, to my husband and myself. And so I said, well, how about if I teach Tai Chi at Naropa and Ben can teach some sensory awareness? So he taught just that 1 year. I created the Tai Chi program at Naropa Institute, now Naropa University, and it's still going on. The first year, it was sort of like, it was called that first year of Naropa, 1974, Boulder, Colorado, was called the Spiritual Woodstock. You know, there were, Trungpa was giving lectures, Ram Dass was there giving lectures, Jack Kornfeld and Joseph Goldstein had just come back from Asia, and they were teaching Vipassana, and I was teaching the Tai Chi, and it was those 4 classes were the most popular of all. There were times when I had 65 people in a class, in a gym. And those were the 4 classes that kept Naropa going for that first year. And I would fly back every month during the winter to make sure the students had, something to keep them going, Tai Chi practice.
Mhm.
And a lot of the people were from Canada. So they asked me to come up there. So every month I was also going up to Vancouver to teach Tai Chi there. And I was taking my little son, my second child, with me. And he would say, do we go on the plane with the peanuts or without the peanuts this time? Because the plane to Boulder gave you peanuts. The plane to Vancouver didn't give you peanuts. That was important to him. In one winter, somebody in Canada said, why do we do it in this cold, rainy, mucky weather? Why don't we go someplace warm? And Charlotte Selver, who taught forever in Mexico in the winter, in Barrio de Navidad, I said, okay, let's go to Barrio de Navidad. So I started teaching Tai Chi in Barrio de Navidad, and then I taught in Manzanillo and all different places. And about 7, 8 years ago, I discovered Yalapa, which is a little fishing village on Bandara Bay on the west coast of Mexico. And you can only get there by boat. It's boat out of Puerto Vallarta, but it prevents a lot of people from coming. No cars in the little village. It's mostly those ATVs that carry around the water bottles, and there's too many of them. But other than that, there's burros and horses and everything, and it's much quieter, even though the tourist boats come. And I love it there. I love it there. So I've been going there regularly, teaching every year. So that's in the winter. That's the warm. And so I teach Tai Chi in the summer on Cortez and in the winter in Yalapa, Mexico.
Do you have a residence in the South somewhere? I'm trying to remember the list of places that you just
No.
go there to teach.
No, I just go there to teach, and I rent the place with a good space for teaching and staying. It's yeah.
Are you a Canadian citizen? Is that how you manage?
No, I
living in-
wish. Believe me, if I were, I'd be up there now. No,
Oh,
when we immigrated there in 1970, we had landed immigrant status, and I was thrilled because, and I wanted to make sure, because I thought I was carrying a boy and I didn't want my son to grow up and be in the war. Turned out to be a girl. Turned out my husband didn't like it. And when I came back and ended up being a single mother of 2, I never thought about that little card that was so important. So it expired, I didn't keep it going.
mm-hmm.
And so when I asked an immigration authority quite some time ago now, because this has been 50 years, I said, do you think I could renew it? And he said, no, ma'am. I said, why? Am I too old and too poor? And he said, yes, ma'am. So
Yeah, to get to Australia now, you have to have a lot of money. I married my way into it. So there's still a big period of time here, like 20 years of the 21st century, that I'm not sure we've covered. Are there any outstanding events or whatever's that we should fill in?
Oh, yeah. Come to think of it, I was thinking, so what, 20 years? That's amazing to think of it in that way.
Well, even the 90s, we haven't had much in the 90s.
Right. Well, let's go to, 99, 98, 99, working with William Emerson.
That's when that was, okay.
Yeah. And Ray Castellino. And then Franklin Sills in Boulder for the cranial work, biodynamic cranial work. At one point, a woman who was in William's class with me said 2 things. We knew that the pre and perinatal field was never going to get the recognition that it deserved unless there were some degrees, some dissertations, some degrees, some people who really can talk. There was Thomas Verney up in Canada, David Chamberlain down here. And so we thought of creating a school and offer degrees. So Marty Glenn, Wendy McCarty, and me, the three of us, and Ken, Marty's husband, got together to create a school for pre and perinatal psychology. And when we got the permission from the state to open this school, we paid $5,000 and they said, okay, you can have 4 programs. And we were doing 1. And Marty looked at me and she said, do you want to do a somatic psychology program? And I had been asking Don Johnson, teaching at CIIS forever. I was in the East-West, I was director of the East-West psychology program. And then when the somatics program came over from Antioch, I joined that and was teaching in that. And I kept saying, let's do a PhD. This is just masters. We need a PhD in this field, somatic psychotherapy. And Don Johnson said, no, it's just too much trouble. It's too much trouble. So the state says, okay, you can have 4 programs. And Marty said, you want to do another program? And I go, sure. So we opened in 2000. Probably worked for 2 years, just pulling, the program together. And it was amazing. Unfortunately, so we had 2 programs, the pre and perinatal program and the somatic psychology program. It overlapped a lot. Most of us taught in both. I wanted everybody to have the sense of sensing, no matter what you do.
Good idea.
And it did some amazing work and taught and developed some amazing people who are now leaders in the field. It's wonderful. But the state started, you have to do this, you have to do this. What I did in the program is that, the basis has to be sensing. You can't help somebody feel themselves until you can feel yourself. So the first year was, sensing for yourself a basis. It was one of those 1 weekend a month things. So people came in from everywhere. So every month, first year was self-sensing. The second year was learning how to work with others in sensing. And the third year was really clinical supervision. How do you work? How does this come into psychotherapy? Because Charlotte Selber was no therapist. Elsa Gindler was no therapist. And the fact that these women, Elfriede Hengstenberg, influenced so many people in the world, they were not therapists in any way. And they influenced so many, many, many different therapies and therapists. Gestalt therapy would not be what it is today if it were not for the sensing work. Laura Pearl studied with Gindler. Fritz Perl studied with Charlotte Selber. So he studied for 1.5 years, private sessions with her.
Really? I didn't know that. Did you know Fritz? I meant to ask that earlier. Was he at Essen when you were there?
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
I got to stay in his house once when I was visiting down there. What's his name? Who's Julian? Anyway.
Oh, Julian, yes. Julian. Oh.
That was killed in the avalanche. If that was Julian, Michael Murphy's partner. Maybe it wasn't Julian, but I'm blocking names.
Oh,
anyway.
No, that was Dick Price.
Dick Price, yeah. Who's
Julian Silverman. No, Dick Price. It was not in the avalanche, just a great big boulder came down on him.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
So let's see, I'm getting lost here.
So we did the school.
Yeah. So what became of the school?
So the school was Santa Barbara Graduate Institute because the 3 others lived in Santa Barbara. So I flew down every every month, sometimes more than once. And eventually, after some years, it was just disheartening the way the program was. We had to take things out to put in some of the statistical classes that the state wanted us to have. We got a lot of really good faculty coming, and we influenced a lot of people who were scientists who never knew that the body was a part, a connection, and people whose names I will not name, but they said, oh yeah, the body could fit in here too. You know, their work was so strong, and then it got to be expanded and has made a great deal of difference in the world, this world of psychology, therapy, all this stuff. So I eventually became very, very discouraged, and I retired from flying down monthly or bi-monthly, whatever. And other people tried to carry it on, but it got to be eventually that Marty Glenn, who was the president, sold it to the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, which basically trashed it. I have some students, one of my students from Japan, who got his degree through it, but just by the skin of his teeth. You know, it was the somatics got dropped by the side, and they had to do whatever. And I think there was some very good work that came out of it, even at the end. And there are some very important people teaching and talking now. Lasted what, 10, 12, maybe 14 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I encountered it when I met Marty through our ATLC summits, and visited there once, and met Marty and Ken a couple of times, but I plan to interview them too.
Oh, visited where? Once.
In Santa Barbara, to their place. Anyway, so what other actions in the 21st century or activities did you get involved in? You got your fingers in so many pies.
Yeah. Well, a few things that I can go back and mention. I've taught in Japan regularly, annually. Taught pre and perinatal psychology, done some of the process workshops, Tai Chi regularly. One of my best students is a Zen master who has a full monastery. And also, well, and basically the sensory awareness is just so important. There is a Sensory Awareness Japan with a website. And now I have a student who I have authorized her and certified her to be a leader. So she's doing quite well there in Japan. And so last year was the first time since 1985, maybe the first time that I didn't go. And at my age, it's a good idea to stop flying around so much. So I feel very good and secure that the work is being continued well in Japan. I never mentioned Rosen method, that I should at least. Yeah. It was so interesting. I met Marion Rosen one day, and I thought, oh, I would like to spend some more time with her. And I figured the only way I got to spend time with her was to take her class. So I took her class for 3 months, and I thought, okay, that's it. No, I think I'd like to hang out with her more. Every 3 months I reassessed it, and before I knew it, I had completed the program and taught many times in Russia, which was very, very interesting. I had been asked to go before the push, before the fall of the Soviet Union. People had seen me teach when I was teaching at JFK, and I was asked, but my children were too young. I just didn't go. So when I went for the first time, it was after the push. But still, it was still very, very, very much And I've been maybe 11 times just working with people. It's really been very gratifying. And to see them no matter what I do, sensory awareness really seems to me to be the basis. So I bring that in, and allowing people to just feel that freedom of a breath, or freedom of just feeling themselves, not having to do anything, but just being.
What a novel idea. I
Very
remember
novel idea.
that line of who wrote Ulysses? The Irish author, Mr. Duffy lived a short distance from his body.
James Joyce, yeah. Yeah. And so
That's
many,
me.
yeah, so many of us do, don't we?
My birth was, more typical, dragged out under anesthesia with forceps and then stuck in a hospital nursery for 2 weeks. I didn't have a near-death experience like you, but yeah, that was a defining moment in my somatic history of, I'm going to create another world for myself in my head because this one sucks. And well, on the 4-hour bottle feeding schedule, there wasn't enough sucking. So I cried after 3 hours. My mother got very upset, but she had to follow the rules. So, and now I associate Rosen with Berkeley for some reason. I don't know why.
Marianne Rosen was, yes, she escaped the Nazis and came around the long way, planning to go to the east part of the United States, but like California, and just stayed there. So yes, it is in Berkeley.
Yeah. I know the name, but I don't know anything more about it. And other pies that you have fingers in, or
I should have brought the whole list so I could see it, Let's see.
we can put it in the narrative description with links.
Okay, yeah.
I already got a whole list of things to connect you with, but yeah. So what was it like being around Fritz Perls?
I didn't like him.
Did anybody?
I think some people did. I thought he was a dirty old man.
That's what I've heard. He was
Yeah.
still around when I was studying it, but I never met him.
Yeah.
But
he
so
liked
often
me. What?
teach what you need to learn.
Yeah, he liked me because he liked Japan. He lived in Japan for a while. He went around South Africa and Japan. I think he liked the Japanese women. So we would talk, or he would talk to me about Japan. But yeah.
Yeah, so often. You mentioned George Leonard. Actually, it was Lily Leonard who discovered me to George, and he had a lot to do with my wellness center getting some publicity. And George wrote an article in New West magazine. But did you have much connection with George?
No, I had more connection with Lily. She studied Tai Chi with me.
Oh, really? I've been wanting to try to track her down. Is she still alive? Do you know? Or
I don't know. I don't know.
She'd be in her 90s, probably, wouldn't she?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, that would be something. I'd like to find out. George kept saying he wanted to get me on the mat, meaning he wanted to compare Aikido and Tai Chi to see how that would work. We never did that. But Lily was beautiful and wonderful.
Yeah. Well, any other connections here? Well, you're like a walk through history with all your connections.
Well, you live as long as I do. You are. I was just thinking there's Lily Leonard, and then in the same class, Joan Erickson, Eric Erickson's wife, studied Tai Chi with me.
Oh.
And Maya Abrahamian. I mean, amazing people passed through those classes at the community church in Mill Valley. And then I had to go to the old post office. Do you remember that? That became a...
Yeah, well, I thought that, what's his name, bought it, the garden people, Smith and Hawken bought the post office, didn't they?
They did. Then I had to move down to the Scouts Hall on East Blythedale, where I taught for so many years. At the end, neither of us could remember how long it had been.
the Scout Hall on East Blythedale. Where's
It's
not placing
nondescript
that?
building, just some steps up. It's ugly. It's nothing. There's just one great big room. Dank. You wouldn't have noticed it.
And then you mentioned you lived in Mill Valley at some point.
I did. I did after the big flood. Yeah, and there was, I was traveling more than 100 miles a day, all the way in San Francisco to CIIS and back. And after the flood, and there was a spring break, I noticed at the end of a certain week, I hadn't seen my children up for the whole week because I had to leave early in the morning, especially up because the bridge was closed. I had to go all the way around, the Bay Bridge. And then I came back at night and they were already asleep. And I figured this is not the way to mother. So I did move into Mill Valley.
Where in Mill Valley, just out of curiosity?
Rented a house on Pine Hill Road for 2 years and then was told that I had to move 3 weeks before the end of school, which was not so good. Then another house on Longfellow Road. But basically I was able to buy a house and it was right on Montford. So you start going up over the hill, you pass my house. And once somebody passed my house too fast and I was waiting to come out of the alley and I got clambered by a too fast going car and totaled the car. But so it was a dangerous place, but that was the time that the Highway 1 was closed for a long, long time. And there was so much traffic going up Montford Avenue. But I was there for more than 20 years, maybe 30 years, yeah.
My daughter and granddaughters live in the name of where the school was. And as you go, before you go up Montford,
Tam High.
No, the valley, I'm blocking.
Tam Valley. There's
the one going out where the old grade school was, that's now Marin Horizon School, right on the tip of my tongue. But small world, yeah. Well, any parting words to wisdom for future generations that we hope may watch this someday?
Yeah, tell me what you're going to do with it.
At this point, I don't know.
Let's see what happens.
Norm Shealy 5 or 6 years ago said, you gotta do this, figure out what to do later. But no, it's unknown what the future is, but I just enjoy reconnecting with old friends and documenting it. And I'm trusting that it's all part of a plan that hasn't been revealed to me yet. So.
Well, just be aware, alert.
Yeah. I mean, I'm fortunate to have known so many amazing people, and so many of them have been willing to share themselves, and I've learned a lot, but it's really documenting my path of how all these people influenced me. And so I'm doing it as much for my own recollection as for future generations. But it's, and we hardly knew each other, but your name always came up, and I never found out so the O in your middle name was your surname, your birth name. Okay.
Yeah,
I always like that O for a middle initial. You don't see a middle initial that's a vowel, an O vowel anyway.
Right, and a lot of people put an apostrophe and figure I'm Irish or something, which
Weaver.
Really not. I mean, sad enough, my father must have misspelled my name on the birth certificate because that YTH is not my affectation. It was his bad spelling.
So were you Judy as a child then?
I was Judy as a child, and in trying to be a little different, I was a Judie for a while.
Oh.
But but it's not a name that I would have chosen, but since I've been given it, I stay with it, and that's the way it is.
Okay.
Just thinking of, so do you remember, because we both had offices in the same office building there on Miller Avenue.
Well, I was at 42 Miller, but were you there
I
too?
was too. I remember saying hello to you, and yeah.
Which office were you in with Mary downstairs, or who?
No,
Which
I was
office?
upstairs. Weren't you upstairs too?
Yeah, we had the big room and then a little one across the hall. But you must have. There was a psychiatrist in there originally, and then somebody else. It kept changing. So,
Yeah, they
what
did
years?
keep changing, that's for sure. No, it was in the front. It was one of the front offices
Yeah,
to the right, and you were to the left, I think.
yeah. But what year was that? It's hard to imagine that I'm not remembering. It must have been when I was fading out.
When were you
80?
fading out? What year?
79, 80 was when I went to Costa Rica.
So it was in the 70s for sure. My second child was born in 73. So it was maybe 75, 76, 77. It was several years I was there before I got, actually, then I moved to, you know, right on the corner, Miller and Blythedale. There was a bar on the corner on the, I don't know what corner, I'm not good with directions, diagonally across from the Book Depot.
Uh-huh.
And on top of the bar were two offices. And I shared an office with Cindy Sheldon.
Oh, Peter Pick and Steve Shim were up there.
Mhm. The other office was a well-known child psychologist whose name I can't remember.
Huh.
Maybe there were three offices there.
Interesting. Well, um, trips down memory lane.
Really, really, yeah. So
So
maybe you'll think of some more questions or something.
yeah, well, if you can close with some kind of a Zen comment, that would be appropriate.
Well, I
Put you
think,
on the spot.
yeah, I think I started with sort of a Zen comment, which was something like, we can't know others until we know ourselves.
Brilliant. Let's wrap up with that then. That's, yep. My variation of that is you teach what you need to learn, and still
Yeah.
wrestling with that one.
And hopefully we also learn from it, from that teaching.
Yes. And our gifts come from our wounds. I got that from Elaine Sullivan years ago, and it's helped me reconcile my wounding and what it gifted me with. So, oh, I didn't ask how you wound up in Seattle though. What's that connection?
Oh, so my son, who really didn't do very well at school, likes to ski, and he was in, I don't know, somewhere. He met someone and they got married, and she's from Seattle, and they now have
Oh,
3 children. So I moved up here to be a grandmother, a hands-on
oh,
grandmother. But unfortunately, my daughter-in-law doesn't like me, so I don't get to be a hands-on grandmother much.
oh dear.
But I rationalize and say, well, it's closer to Cortez. You know, saves me a day driving.
Uh-huh. Well, thank you again, Judith. It's been a delight after 40 some years. And
It's been fun remembering.
likewise. Okay, I'm going to end the recording.
Great. Thank you for asking. This has been very interesting.
Me too.